The year was 1868, and it meant spring in central Texas. But the word spring felt like a lie told by a politician. The war between the states had ended, but the peace was a thin, ragged blanket. The land itself looked tired. Fences meant to divide property and protect livestock sagged against the ground like men drunk on cheap whiskey. The wind was the only thing that seemed to have any purpose. It came from the west, carrying dust that tasted of the panhandle, stinging the eyes and coating the world in a uniform shade of brown. Yet there was color. Bluebonnets, stubborn and defiant, pushed up through the cracked clay. They bloomed out of season, a scattered purple-blue army refusing to surrender. It was a sign of resurrection, perhaps, or maybe it was just nature's indifference to the affairs of men. Into this landscape walked Caroline Doss. She had been walking for a long time. The hem of her dark wool dress, a garment made for a colder life in the East, was heavy with the red dust of the road. It clung to her ankles, a physical reminder of how far she had fallen and how far she had come. She was 23 years old. She was a widow. Thomas, her husband, was a memory that had started to fade at the edges, like a photograph left in the sun. He had been a gentleman, full of books and theories. The war had taken him, or perhaps it was the fever that came after. The result was the same. He was gone, and she was alone, with no money and no protector. She had arrived at the Dry Creek Ranch. It was not a grand place, just a collection of weathered buildings, a main house that needed paint, a long bunkhouse, and a large barn that leaned just slightly to the north, as if trying to escape the southern sun. Caroline did not come here seeking pity. Pity was a thin soup that left you hungry. She was here for work. She set her jaw, a gesture that was familiar to her own muscles. She would not cry. She would not beg. She knew how to mend harness. She knew how to break a horse gently. She knew how to keep books, how to cook for 20 men, and how to shoot a rifle. She knew how to work, and she believed, perhaps foolishly, that work still had value. A group of men, ranch hands, were gathered near the bunkhouse, ostensibly mending tack. They stopped when they saw her. The silence was loud, broken only by the creak of a windmill blade needing grease. They looked at her, and they saw her. Not the determination, not the grief she kept locked behind her ribs. They saw her size. Caroline was not a small woman. She was tall, and she was, in the language of the time, sturdy. She had been called fat in whispers, and sometimes by children in shouts. She was built with a generosity that this harsh land did not appreciate. A low chuckle started. "That is a lot of woman to bring to a small fight," one man, thin as a rail, muttered to his friend. His friend, younger, spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the dust. "That is a lot of saddle weight, I tell you." The words hit her, physical as stones. She had heard them all her life. They were the currency of small towns, the moral judgments passed by small minds. A widow was a curiosity, a problem to be solved or a temptation to be avoided. A fat widow was a joke. She felt the familiar heat rise in her cheeks, but she pushed it down. She would not give them the satisfaction. This was the first line of defense, the casual cruelty of men who had nothing better to do. He stood apart from them, over by the barn, half hidden in the shade of the overhang. Finn LaRue. He might have been 30 years old, or he might have been 50. It was hard to tell with men who lived their lives in the wind. He was tall, and he leaned against a cedar post with a stillness that was almost unsettling, as if he were a part of the building itself. He had been a soldier. It was not something he spoke of, but it was there in the way he held himself, in the way his eyes never seemed to rest, always scanning, always assessing. His face was a map of sun and wind and something else, something harder. He watched Caroline Doss walk from the road. He saw the other hands, heard their low, mean laughter. He despised that kind of talk. It was easy. It was weak. Finn's gaze was different. He was not looking at her waistline. He was not calculating her weight. He was reading the weather in her. He saw the exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders, but he also saw the iron in her spine that kept her from collapsing. He saw the way her hands, calloused and capable, were fisted at her sides. He saw a woman who looked like she'd been through worse, much worse, and was still standing. That was the kind of strong this place needed. This story, you see, is told from the dust. It is not told from the drawing rooms. It hovers close to Caroline, feeling the pinch of her worn boots. The leather was cracked, and the sole on the left one was thin. Every step was a small pain, but she had walked through so many small pains that they had just become a part of walking. Her good boots were in her satchel, saved for an occasion that had not yet arrived. Then the story shifts, just a little, and settles on Finn's shoulder. He carried his own burdens. Tucked inside his shirt, against his skin, was a small, broken crucifix. The wood smoothed by years of sweat. It was not for faith, it was for memory. In his pocket, a handkerchief, old linen embroidered with blue flowers by a mother he barely remembered. He used it to wipe the grease from a gun part. Practical. He distrusted things that were not practical. Over the barn door, someone had nailed a horseshoe. It was rusted, and it was hung prongs down, all the luck spilling out onto the hard-packed dirt. Finn looked at it every morning and thought it was about right. This place, Dry Creek, was not looking for a romance. Caroline was not looking for a husband. She was looking for dignity, and dignity came from work. She was looking for a place to stand, a place where she could be more than just the widow. She just wanted a shadow to stand next to her own, not to cover it, but to be a companion against the overwhelming sun. And Finn, he was just looking for a long day's work. Enough labor to exhaust his body so his mind would go quiet. The war had left him with ghosts, and they hated the daylight. They only came out when he was still. The land itself held its breath, waiting. It knew what was coming, even if the people did not. The high, thin howl of the coyote packs at night was a prophecy of hunger. The air, already dry in this unnatural spring, held the scent of cedar and a faint, smoky promise of wildfire. The sky would hold back, hold back, hold back, and then it would unleash a true Texas rain, a storm that would try to wash the whole county into the Gulf of Mexico. These three forces, the beasts, the fire, and the water, they were the true tests. No one is being romanticized here. The narrator telling you this story is not going to paint these people in soft colors. This is not a tale of heroes and villains. Not really. It is a tale of flawed people trying to survive in a flawed world. The judgment is left to you. The actions will speak for themselves. A seed of a theme is planted here, in this dusty yard. Gentleness is not the same as weakness. Dignity is earned through sweat, not granted by society. And sometimes, the family you choose, the one you build from the broken pieces of other lives, is the strongest one of all. Caroline Doss took a deep breath, smelling the dust, the leather, the sharp scent of cedar from the barn. She ignored the laughter. She squared her shoulders, making her back a straight, solid line. She fixed her eyes on the main house, where she assumed the boss would be. She took one step, and then another, walking straight into the nest of her smallest, most immediate enemies. And Finn LaRue watched her go. He did not move. He just watched, and he waited. She reached the main house. The porch steps were warped, the wood silvered by sun and time. She put her foot on the first one, the worn leather of her boot groaning in protest. The laughter of the men behind her felt like insects crawling on her neck, but she did not turn. A young man came out of the front door, letting the screen door slap shut behind him. He was thin, with a pale face that had not seen enough sun. He wore a clean shirt and a vest, and he carried a ledger under his arm. He looked like paper. This must be Jed Carter, the clerk. He was the gatekeeper, the wielder of ink and numbers. He stopped when he saw her, his expression a mix of surprise and immediate disapproval. He was perhaps 19, maybe 20, but he wore the pinched, judgmental face of a much older man who had found his small perch of power. "Can I help you, madam?" His voice was high, reedy. Caroline planted both feet on the porch. The bad boot was killing her. A small, sharp pebble had worked its way through the worn sole and was pressing into the ball of her foot. She ignored it. She had ignored worse. "I am looking for work," she said. Her voice was lower than his, and steadier. Jed Carter actually blinked. He looked past her, at the small audience of ranch hands who had now drifted closer, their faces alight with cruel anticipation. This was entertainment. The barnyard had become a theater. The dirt was the stage, and she was the unwilling performer. "Work," he repeated, as if she had spoken in a foreign language. "Madam, this is a cattle ranch. We do not have positions for—" He looked her up and down, and his eyes lingered. He was not looking for strength. He was measuring her femininity and finding it lacking by his standards, and then measuring her body and finding it too abundant. "We have no work for a woman." "I am not a woman," Caroline said, and the words stopped him, just for a second. "I mean, I am, but I am not here as one. I am here as a worker. I can cook, I can clean, I can mend tack, I can keep your books for you." She nodded at the ledger under his arm. "And I wager I can do it with a cleaner hand than most." Behind her, one of the men let out a forced cough that sounded remarkably like a bark. Jed Carter's pale skin flushed pink. He was insulted. "I'm perfectly capable. Thank you. We have a cook. We do not require a maid, and the men mend their own tack." "I can also ride," Caroline said, pushing on. The stone in her boot was digging deeper. "I can break horses, gently. I do not use fear, and I can handle a rifle." This was, apparently, the funniest thing they had ever heard. The laughter that followed was not a chuckle. It was a roar. One man, the one who had spat tobacco, actually slapped his knee. "Ride," he yelled out, playing to his friends. "Ride what? Ma'am, we ain't got a string of draft animals for the hands." Another joined in, his voice full of mock concern. "Careful, Jed. She might sit on a calf and smother it before we get the brand on." The words landed. They always did. She felt the heat on her throat, the familiar, stinging shame. This was the true battlefield, not the one with bullets and cannons that had taken Thomas, but this one, the one fought with words, in dusty yards, with men as judges. She felt the old, internal quiver, the voice that whispered she was too much, too big, a burden, a joke, the part of her that wanted to turn, run, and hide, the part of her that had been trained to be small, to apologize for the space she took up. But self-pity was a luxury she had sold long ago, along with her mother's silver locket. Her gaze drifted past Jed Carter's shoulder, to the tools hanging from pegs on the porch wall. There was a coiled lariat, stiff and new, a curry comb with missing teeth, a bundle of leather strips for mending. Her hand moved, a motion of its own will. Her fingers, calloused and strong, brushed against the frayed end of a rope. She felt the fibers, rough and honest. She knew this rope. She knew its language. She knew the weight of a brush in her palm, the smell of harness soap. This was real. The laughter was just noise. She pulled her hand back and fisted it at her side. "I am not asking for charity, sir," she said, her voice dropping, gaining a new, hard edge. The quiver was gone. "I am asking for a wage for a day's work. I will not be a burden. I will earn my keep." The whole yard was silent now. Even Finn LaRue, leaning against his distant post, had not moved. He was a statue carved from shadow. His stillness was a weight, a counterbalance to the men's nervous energy. He was not looking at her body. He was, as ever, reading the weather. And he saw the storm gathering in her eyes. Jed Carter, puffed up with his authority, felt the scene slipping. He held the ledger like a shield. "That is quite impossible. We are not a charity, as you say. We have no place for you. I must ask you to leave. You are distracting the men." He had dismissed her. The show was over. The men started to break up. Satisfied, they had their story for the bunkhouse. Caroline stood there. She could not move. To move was to accept defeat, to accept that she was what they said she was, useless. A joke, a fat widow. The stone in her boot was a spike of agony now, a small, insistent torture. It was a perfect metaphor. Her whole life was a badly fitted boot, punishing her for just trying to walk. The moment hung, suspended in the dry air. The whole thing was balanced on the point of a pin. The world was waiting to see which way she would fall. She had played her hand. The bank, in the form of Jed Carter, had refused her. The audience had laughed her off the stage. It would take one person, just one person to change the rules of the game, to call the bet. Her gaze, against her will, slid from Jed Carter's smug face, past the smirking ranch hands, and across the wide, dusty expanse of the yard. It landed on the silent man by the barn. He had not looked away. His eyes, the color of a winter sky, were fixed on her, and he was not laughing. He was just watching, waiting, reading. Jed Carter's words hung in the air, a final, petty judgment. "You are distracting the men." He had dismissed her. The ranch hands, their sport concluded, began to turn away, their smirks fading into the dullness of their afternoon chores. One man, the one who had joked about her weight, kicked at a stone, already forgetting her. Caroline Doss stood alone. The dust settled around her. She was supposed to leave. She was supposed to take her shame and her worn-out boots and walk back down the red dirt road, disappearing into the heat haze. This was the end of the scene, as written by the town, by the men, by her entire life. She did not move. The pain from the stone in her boot was a hot, sharp nail, pinning her to the earth. She could feel the blood, warm and sticky inside her sock. She had two choices. She could turn and walk away, proving them right, or she could stand. She chose to stand, slowly, as if moving a great weight. She turned her head. She did not look at the smirking men. She did not look at the empty road. She looked at Jed Carter, the boy with the ledger and the power of no. He was already turning to go back inside, annoyed that she was still there. "Sir," she said. Her voice was not loud. It was not a plea. It was a statement. It cut through the yard. Jed Carter stopped, his hand on the screen door. The ranch hands paused. Even the windmill seemed to hold its creak. She took a breath, not for courage, but for air. She had no pride left to swallow, only the hard, dry pit of fact. She would give him the truth. She would hand them the weapon they all used against her, but she would blunt it with her own honesty. "No man marries a fat widow, sir," she said, her voice clear, carrying on the still air. "I know that. You know that. They—" She gestured to the silent men. "They certainly know that. I am not here for a husband." She paused, and the silence that followed was profound. It was a drop beat in the rhythm of the ranch. The laughter was gone, replaced by a stunned, uneasy quiet. A horse in the corral, which had been rattling its feed bucket, went utterly still. The men stared, their mouths slightly open. She had taken their joke, their ugliest, meanest word, and said it aloud in the sunshine. "But I can work." The three words landed like stones in a still pond. They were simple, they were true, and they were all she had left. A scrape. From the shade of the barn, a sound, a boot heel sliding on hard-packed dirt and stone. Finn LaRue pushed himself off the cedar post. He was no longer a shadow, no longer a part of the building. He was a man, and he was walking. He moved with a long, unhurried stride, out of the shade and into the full, harsh glare of the Texas afternoon. The ranch hands, who had been a loose, mocking semicircle, parted for him. They did not look at him. They just moved, a natural, instinctive gesture of respect, or perhaps fear. He walked past them, his boots making the only sound in the world. He did not go to the porch. He did not go to her. He stopped in the center of the yard, a point equidistant from the accuser and the accused. He still had not looked at Jed Carter. His gaze was fixed on Caroline. He had been reading the weather, and now the storm had broken. He saw the dust on her face, the defiant set of her jaw, the way she held her left foot, trying to keep the weight off it. He saw the shame she had just wrestled to the ground and pinned with her own words. He spoke. His voice was low, and it had a gravelly texture, as if he did not use it often. It was not a voice for drawing rooms. It was a voice for high winds and open spaces. "You look like someone who's been through worse," he said, speaking directly to her, as if they were the only two people for 100 miles. "That's the kind of strong this place needs." Caroline's world, which had been a very small, very painful place, suddenly tilted. She had built a fortress around herself, a wall of low expectations. She was prepared for insults, for dismissal, for pity. She was not, in any way, prepared for this. She was not prepared to be seen. The words, "the kind of strong this place needs," echoed in the empty space where her defenses had been. He had not called her pretty. He had not called her brave. He had not offered her comfort. He had looked at her, at all of her, and seen strength. He had validated her entire reason for existing. She was, for the first time in her adult life, utterly and completely speechless. Only then did Finn LaRue turn his head. A slow, deliberate motion, to look at the clerk cowering on the porch. Jed Carter's face was a blotchy red. He was an ant whose hill had just been kicked over by a boot he did not dare challenge. "She rides with me tomorrow," Finn said. It was not a question, it was not a suggestion, it was a fact, like the sunrise. Jed sputtered. He held his ledger to his chest like a holy book. "Mr. LaRue, I am in charge of the payroll. The boss, he did not authorize. We cannot simply—" Finn's gaze did not leave him. It was a cold, patient gaze, the kind of look a man gives a difficult knot before he tightens his grip and breaks it. "Then fix the books, Jed," he said, his voice flat. "She rides at dawn." He did not wait for an answer. The conversation was over. He turned, his back to all of them, and began his long, steady walk back to the barn. He did not look at Caroline. He had not offered her a hand to hold. He had offered her a job. He was not her romantic savior. He was, perhaps, something far rarer, a true ally. He had given her a chance to prove her own words. He had accepted her on her terms. "I can work." The rest was up to her. The ranch hands were frozen. The game was over. The rules had been rewritten. Their mockery was now just a sour taste in their mouths. They would not cross Finn LaRue, but the seed of their resentment did not die. It just burrowed deeper, waiting for a new reason to sprout. They looked at Caroline with a new, unwelcome light. She was not just a joke anymore. She was one of LaRue's, and that made her a problem. Caroline stood in the yard, the echo of his words still ringing in her ears. She watched his tall frame disappear into the darkness of the barn. The sun was low now, casting the world in gold and long shadows. His shadow, tall and straight, stretched from the barn. Her own shadow, solid and unflinching, stretched from the center of the yard. They pointed east, away from the dying light. They were separate, but for a moment, they seemed to be walking beside each other. The wind, which had held its breath, let out a long sigh. It rustled the dry leaves of the cottonwood by the trough and brought with it the scent of the man who had just passed cedar from the post he had leaned on, the faint, clean smell of soap on his clothes, and something metallic, like old iron. It was the smell of a man who did not waste words. She was speechless, not with fear, not with shame, but with the sudden, terrifying, and beautiful burden of being seen. She had asked for work. She had been given a battle, and, for the first time, She had been given an ally. She let out the breath she had been holding. It came out as a shudder. The pain in her foot was screaming now. Good. It was a reminder that she was still on Earth. She did not look at Jed Carter, who was still fuming on the porch. She did not look at the ranch hands, who were now shuffling away, eager to not be a part of this. She bent down, her movements stiff, and opened her satchel. She pulled out her good boots. They were not new, but the leather was sound, and the soles were thick. She sat down on the bottom porch step, right in front of the fuming clerk, pulled off her broken boot, and did not wince at the sight of her bloody sock. She was not a widow. She was not a joke. She was a hand. She started work tomorrow. Dawn at Dry Creek was not a gentle thing. It was a cold, gray announcement. The day before, she had been given a place in the small, windowless tack room off the main barn. It was meant for storage, not for a person. But it was hers. It smelled of old leather, axle grease, and dust. It was a palace. Her first morning, she found the mess hall. When she walked in, carrying her own tin plate, the table of 20 men went silent. No one moved to make room for her. She stood for a long, awkward moment, a solitary island in a sea of hostile silence. Finally, she took her plate and a piece of hard bread and went back to the tack room, eating her breakfast alone, leaning against a stack of stiff saddles. This was the pattern. The society of men did not absorb her. It actively repelled her. She was invisible and, at the same time, the most visible person on the ranch. They did not speak to her. They did not show her where the tools were kept, where the lye soap was stored, or which horses were gentle and which were biters. So she watched. She learned by observing. She was the first one in the barn, the last one to leave. The work was brutal. Her hands, which she had thought were strong, were not prepared for this. She mended harnesses for 8 hours straight, the waxed thread and the sharp awl digging into her soft palms. She shoveled manure from the stalls until her back screamed, the muscles locking in a way she had never known. Her arms ached from lifting heavy feed sacks. Blisters rose, broke, and bled. The skin on her palms became a raw, weeping map of her new life. Every night, she would fall onto her cot in the tack room, too tired to even wash the grime from her face, her entire body a single, throbbing ache. The men watched. They were placing bets in the bunkhouse. Oh, she was sure. On how many days it would be before she broke. 3 days, she heard one of them mutter. I give her 3 days. But she did not break. And she was not, she realized, entirely alone. The help she received was as silent and practical as the man who gave it. On the second morning, she found her canteen, which she had left empty by her door, filled to the brim with fresh, cold well water. A lariat she had spent a frustrating hour trying to coil lay on its peg, looped in the perfect, tight circles of a professional hand. One morning, she woke to find her good boots, the ones she had worn in, gone. A hot spike of panic shot through her. They were all she had. She rushed outside, and there they were, sitting by the tack room door. She picked them up. They were heavier. He had taken them. He had taken them in the night, stripped off the worn, paper-thin soles, and replaced them with thick, new, perfectly stitched leather. He had even rubbed oil into the cracked uppers, making them supple again. It was an act of profound, unspoken intimacy. He had held her boots. He had measured her foot. He had seen her pain and, without a word, had fixed it. She put the boots on. They did not punish her. They held her. That afternoon, she was trying to repair a draft horse collar, the leather old and stiff as a board. Her hands were raw, and the cut she had given herself with the awl the day before had split open again. She was bleeding on the leather, a dark red smear that made her want to weep with frustration. He appeared, as he always did, without a sound. One moment she was alone. The next, Finn LaRue was standing there. He just watched her for a second, his gray eyes taking in the blood, the tear tracks she was trying to hide, the trembling of her hands. He did not offer to take the work from her. He did not say a word of comfort. He reached into his own shirt pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of linen. It was old, and in the corner, she saw the faint, faded blue embroidery of a flower, his mother's handkerchief. He pushed it into her hand. "For the blood," he said. His voice was rough. She looked at the handkerchief, this small, clean piece of a life she could not imagine. He was trusting her with a piece of his past, a family heirloom. He was trusting her to bleed on it. "Thank you," she whispered. He just nodded and walked away. The next day, he took her to the round pen. A young filly, nervous and wide-eyed, trotted circles around them. "She's a head shaker," he said. "The last hand tried to break her with a heavy bit. Now she fights." He put a simple rope halter on the horse. Then he handed a long rein to Caroline. "Don't pull," he said. "A bit is just iron in her mouth. It is a question, not an order. You ask, you don't command." Caroline stood in the center of the pen. She held the rope. She did not command. She asked. She let the filly feel the weight. And when the horse relaxed, she relaxed. When the horse panicked, she stood still, a calm anchor in the center of the storm. After an hour, the filly was standing next to her, nuzzling her shoulder. Finn, leaning on the fence, said nothing. He did not need to. The test came 3 days later. They were riding the north fence line, checking for breaks. The sun was low, painting the sky in shades of blood. They heard the cattle before they saw them, a lowing sound that meant fear. A small pack of coyotes, gaunt and bold with hunger, was harassing a newborn calf, separating it from its mother. Finn pulled his rifle from its scabbard, his movements economical and fast. But Caroline was just as fast. She had been carrying Thomas's old rifle, and she knew how to use it. Before Finn could get a bead, she raised her own rifle. She did not aim at the animals. She did not try to kill them. She aimed at a sheet of rock 50 yards above their heads. She took a breath, held it, and fired one shot. The crack of the rifle was deafening, echoing and bouncing off the rocks. It sounded like a cannon. The coyotes, startled by the sudden, overwhelming noise, scattered. They were gone in a flash of gray fur. The calf, bleating, ran back to its mother. Finn sat on his horse, his rifle still in his hands. He looked at the rocks, then at the disappearing coyotes, then at her. He saw the wisp of smoke from her rifle barrel, the calm way she held the weapon. He slowly, very slowly, lowered his own rifle and slid it back into its scabbard. He gave her a single, slow nod. It was not praise, it was a statement. It meant you are a professional. I see you. It was the single greatest compliment she had ever received. They rode back in silence. That Sunday, the one day of rest, she finally asked him, "I need to go to the cemetery." She said, "My husband, he is buried there." He just nodded and went to saddle 2 horses. They rode the 3 miles to the small, wind-blown cemetery outside the town. She found the grave easily. It was a simple wooden cross, already leaning, with the name Thomas Doss fading on the wood. She stood there for a long time. Finn stood with her, a few feet back, his hands clasped behind him, giving her the space. "I was ashamed," Caroline said, her voice so low the wind almost stole it. He was a gentleman, full of books. He was not strong, and I—" She looked down at her own capable, scarred hands. I was bigger than him. I was stronger, and I was ashamed of that." She took a ragged breath. "And I was ashamed," she whispered, "that when he died, after the grief, I was relieved. I was relieved he was not my burden anymore." What kind of woman does that make me? Finn was silent for a long time. He did not give her cheap comfort. He did not tell her she was wrong. He just listened. He let her truth sit in the air. Then he walked back to his horse, reached into his saddlebag, and pulled something out. It was the rusted horseshoe from the barn door, the one that was hung prongs down, letting all the luck spill out. He had taken it. He walked to the small grave. He knelt, his tall frame folding. He dug a small bit of the hard earth away from the base of the cross, and he set the horseshoe there, prongs facing up, to catch the luck, to hold it. He stood. No one should walk alone, he said. They rode back as the sun was setting. The vast Texas sky was on fire. Their shadows were long on the prairie grass. Two dark shapes, riding side by side. Why did you do it? She asked, breaking the long silence. That first day, why did you speak for me? He did not look at her. He looked forward, at the horizon. This land, he said, his voice quiet. It takes everything. It burns you down. It leaves you with nothing but what you can do with your hands. I saw you had that. The rest is just noise. She nodded, understanding. I am grateful for the work, she said, but I am not looking for... He knew what she was trying to say. He knew she was trying to draw a line, to protect them both from the assumptions of the bunkhouse. He cut her off, but his voice was not harsh. I am not asking for your hand. Caroline, he said, his gaze fixed on their two long shadows, moving as one over the grass. I am asking for your shadow to be next to mine. They rode back from the cemetery, their two shadows stretching long and then finally dissolving as the sun dipped below the rim of the earth. They had left the grave with its new, upturned horseshoe. Two sets of footprints pressed into the dust, side by side, leading away from the past. It was an unspoken promise, a chosen path. The next week, the rhythm of work held them, but the peace was a thin crust over a simmering pot. A rider came in from the western boundary, his horse lathered, his face pale with dust and fear. He all but fell from the saddle, stumbling toward the main house, shouting for the boss. Finn and Caroline were mending a gate hinge near the barn. They both stopped. McVeigh Ridge Gang! The rider was yelling, loud enough for the whole yard to hear. They are running cattle. They are not our cattle. They ran off our man. Put a bullet through his hat. They are close. An unease settled over Dry Creek. The men worked with their rifles slung over their backs. The easy, cruel banter of the bunkhouse was replaced by a tense, watchful silence. The threat was no longer a vague possibility. It was a name and a location. This new tension needed a target, and Caroline was the easiest one. When she rode into town for supplies, Finn had insisted, telling Jed Carter she was the only one who could be trusted to count the change the whispers followed her. She walked into the general store, her list in her hand, and the conversation stopped. The townswomen, in their clean calico dresses, looked at her. They saw her sturdy frame, her work-stained hands, the man's hat she wore to keep off the sun, and they looked at her with the particular, venomous judgment reserved for women who broke the rules. That is her. One woman whispered, not quietly enough, to her friend. The one who trapped that poor Mr. LaRue, a big woman like that, must be desperate. Brought nothing but trouble, I hear, the other replied, her eyes cold. He was a good, quiet man until she showed up. Now the whole ranch is on edge. Caroline stood by the flour barrel, her back to them. She felt the words like wasps, stinging her neck, her cheeks. She had been seen, and now she was being judged. She had not brought Finn comfort. She had made him a target of gossip. She was, as she had always been, a burden. She was too much. She bought the flour, the beans, and the ammunition, her face a stoic mask. Jed Carter, who had come along to supervise the transaction, watched her with a small, satisfied smirk. He had heard the whispers, too. That night, the sky broke. The rain that had been threatening for weeks finally arrived. It was not a gentle spring shower. It was a Texas deluge, a vertical ocean falling from the sky. The wind howled, the barn roof groaned. The world was reduced to the sound of water and thunder. In her small tack room, Caroline lit a lantern. The water was already seeping under the door, a dark, muddy pool on the dirt floor. She looked at her few belongings, her good boots, her satchel, Thomas's rifle. She was bringing them danger. The McVeigh Ridge gang was an external threat, but she was the internal one. She was the one weakening them, making them a subject of gossip when they needed to be a tight, focused unit. She was the reason Finn was being pitied as trapped. She would not be his burden. She would not be the cause of his shame. She packed her satchel. It did not take long. She put on her oilskin slicker. She would wait until the middle of the night, when the watch changed, and she would slip away. She would walk. She had walked here, she could walk away. She did not know he was there until a cold draft hit her back. He was standing in the doorway. He was not wearing a slicker. He was soaked to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his skull, water running in rivers down his face and beard. He filled the entire doorway. "What are you doing, Caroline?" he asked. The thunder outside almost covered his voice, but it was a rumble she could feel. "I am leaving," she said, her hands fisted on the strap of her satchel. "I will not be the trouble this ranch talks about. I will not be the woman who trapped you." He did not move. He just looked at her, the lantern light catching the drops on his eyelashes. "The town," he said, his voice flat. "You are leaving because of the town." "I am leaving because I am bringing you shame," she burst out, the words finally breaking free. "They are laughing at you. They are pitying you because of me." "I do not care about the town," he said. "Then you should," she cried, pushing past him. She had to get out. She stepped out of the tack room and into the barn's central aisle. The rain was blowing in through the open barn doors, a cold, violent spray. "I am going." She tried to walk past him, toward the door. He did not grab her. He did not yell. He simply stepped in her way. "Get out of my way, Finn." "No." She pushed at his chest. It was like pushing against the cedar post he used to lean on. It did not move. "You gave me this job," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Let me go. I am too much. I am bringing this ranch down. I am bringing you down." He looked at her for a long, still moment, the world a chaos of wind and water around them. He reached into his wet shirt pocket and pulled something out. He pressed it into her hand. It was his mother's handkerchief, the one she had bled on. It was damp from the rain, but she could feel that it was clean. He had washed it. He had kept it, and now he was giving it back. "Do not go," he said. His voice was raw. "Just do not go." She looked at the handkerchief in her palm, and the wall she had kept around her heart for 5 years finally shattered. She began to cry, not gentle tears, but hard, gasping sobs that tore up from her soul. He pulled her in. It was not a kiss. It was not a romantic, gentle embrace. He pulled her against his soaked chest with a force that almost knocked the wind from her. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand on her back, one on the back of her head, and he just held her. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a flood. He held her as if he, too, were drowning and she was his anchor. She pressed her face into his wet shirt, smelling the rain, the leather, and the man himself. She gripped his shirt, and she held on. They stood there in the wind and the spray. Two people who had been through worse. They stood there for a long time. The only sound, the roar of the storm, and the two unsteady heartbeats pressed against each other. They stood there until their breathing, which had been ragged, began to slow. They stood there until their hearts, which had been hammering, found a new, quiet rhythm. It was not lust, it was trust. It was the deepest, most profound intimacy she had ever known. Finally, he loosened his grip, but he did not let go. He just held her shoulders, keeping her in front of him. She looked up at him, her face wet with rain and tears. The town's whispers were gone. They had been washed away. This water had cleaned her. "I am staying," she said, It was not a question. For the work. A small, almost invisible smile touched the corner of his mouth. Good, he said, his voice still rough. The calves need watching. We take the first watch. Later that night, the storm had passed, leaving the air clean and cold. They sat on their horses on a small rise, overlooking the herd of calves. The moon was a sliver. He was quieter than usual. He reached inside his shirt and pulled out the small, broken crucifix. He held it in his calloused palm. I was at a place called Shiloh, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. There was a boy. He was from my town. He was crying for his mother. I told him to be quiet. Finn's hand closed around the crucifix, his knuckles white. He did not get to be quiet for long. This was his. He had shown her his weakness. He had shown her the wound that would not heal. Caroline did not offer him platitudes. She just sat with him in the silence, sharing the weight, after a long time. She pointed to a knot on her saddle. We had a harness maker in my father's town. She said, he taught me this. He called it a war knot. He said it was for when things had to hold, no matter what. Finn looked at the intricate, unbreakable knot. He looked at her. Their skills were in harmony. Their trust was absolute. 2 sets of footprints, leaving the grave, walking a chosen path. As the first gray light of dawn touched the sky, Finn's head came up. He sniffed the air. He was pointing. Look, he said. Far on the eastern horizon, in a place it had no right to be, was a thin, dark column of smoke. The rain had passed. The fire was coming. The thin, dark line of smoke on the horizon was not a wildfire. Finn LaRue knew the difference. He had seen enough of both. A wildfire was a disorganized, sprawling monster. This was a single, purposeful column. It was the smoke of a lit torch, not a lightning strike. It was the smoke of men. Ride, he said to Caroline. His voice was flat, all the quiet contemplation of the pre-dawn watch gone, replaced by the cold, sharp edge of a soldier. Ride hard. Do not stop. Warn the ranch. They did not speak. There was no need. They put their horses into a gallop, the 2 of them riding as one, their shadows flying over the prairie, racing the sun. They hit the ranch yard at a full run, Finn yelling before he even dismounted. Riders coming from the east torches. Get the rifles. The ranch, which had been in the gray, sleepy moments of waking, exploded into frantic, useless motion. Men ran from the bunkhouse, half-dressed, rubbing their eyes. Jed Carter appeared on the porch of the main house, his ledger in his hand, as if he meant to take a tally of the attackers. Mr. LaRue, he shrieked. What is the meaning of this? Finn ignored him. He was already pulling his rifle, and 2 extra boxes of ammunition. From the stable. He tossed Thomas's rifle to Caroline. The trough, he said. It is good cover. Stay there, and shoot. Then the riders were on them. It was not a war. It was a raid. 10, maybe 12 men, their faces covered with bandanas, howling like madmen. They were not there to fight a pitched battle. They were there to burn and to steal. They fanned out, one group heading for the stables, the other led by a large man with a bright red scarf around his neck, making for the feed store. That is him, the ranch hand who had given the first warning yelled. That is Red Scarf. The world dissolved into noise, gunshots, sharp and popping, mixing with the whoosh of lit torches. A horse screamed. A window in the main house shattered. The Dry Creek hands, caught by surprise, were a disorganized mess. They fired from the bunkhouse windows, but their shots were wild, panicked. This was what the McVeigh Ridge gang counted on. Fear. Finn was not afraid. He was cold. He moved with a terrible, economical grace. He dropped to one knee, sighted, and fired. One of the raiders, about to throw a torch onto the main house roof, clutched his chest and slid from his horse. Finn was already sighting his next shot. Caroline was not afraid either. She was at the water trough, the solid, wet wood a comfort against her shoulder. The world was loud, but she was not a soldier, but she was a person who had been tested. She knew how to hold a rifle. She knew how to breathe. She saw Red Scarf. He had dismounted and was running toward the feed store with a lit torch. He was their leader. He was their courage. She had learned this from Finn Stop the Leader, and you stop the mob. She did not think. She did not panic. She did as she had done with the coyotes. She put the bead of her rifle sight on the man. She breathed out. She did not aim for his heart. She aimed for his right arm, the one holding the torch. She aimed for his shoulder. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her. Across the yard, Red Scarf screamed, a high, thin sound. He dropped the torch. He grabbed his shoulder, and the front of his shirt bloomed with dark red. He staggered back, his face a mask of shock and pain. His men saw it. They saw their leader fall. The howling stopped. They hesitated. The attack faltered. It was in that half-second of chaos that it happened. Finn had seen two other raiders trying to circle around to the stables, to the horses. He moved to cut them off, running low, his rifle at the ready. One of the men, a younger, panicked raider, saw him coming. He was near a stack of new cedar beams, meant for repairing the corral. The top beam was already loose, scarred by a stray bullet. The raider did not fire. He shoved. He shoved the beam. Finn was focused on the second man, the one with the pistol. He did not see the heavy, dark timber until it was too late. The beam swung down like a gallows arm, catching him square across the back of his shoulders and the side of his head. There was no sound, no cry. Finn LaRue simply dropped. He fell, face first, into the dirt and went utterly still. Caroline saw him fall. The world, which had been a wide canvas of chaos, narrowed to a single, terrible point. The gunfire, the shouting, the smell of smoke. It all went away. She left the cover of the trough. She ran. She did not have her rifle. She just ran, her boots pounding the dust. The raider who had pushed the beam, the young one, saw her coming. He saw Finn, unmoving on the ground. He grinned, a cruel, triumphant expression. He raised his pistol, intending to finish the job. Caroline reached Finn. She did not stop. She threw herself over his body, covering his back with her own. She spread her arms wide, as if she could shield him from the whole world. She looked up at the raider, who was now only 10 feet away. Her face was not the face of a widow. It was not the face of a victim. It was a mask of pure, primal rage. "Do not touch him!" she screamed. The sound was not a plea. It was a command, torn from her throat. The raider stopped. He actually laughed, a short, barking sound. He was amused by her, by this large, foolish woman who thought she could stop a bullet. He leveled his pistol. He was aiming at the center of her back. A shot cracked. The raider's eyes went wide. He looked down. A small, dark hole had appeared in the center of his chest. He looked up, his expression one of pure surprise. He toppled backward. Caroline turned her head. Standing in the doorway of the bunkhouse, his knuckles white on his rifle, was the ranch hand, the one who had made the joke about saddle weight. His face was pale, his mouth open, as if he could not believe what he had just done. He was staring at Caroline, his gaze a mixture of terror, confusion, and a new, startling awe. That was the end. Red Scarf, clutching his shoulder, was screaming at his men. "Get out! Get out!" They did not need to be told twice. They grabbed their wounded leader, threw him on a horse, and fled. They disappeared back into the east, leaving behind one of their dead in the smoking ruin of the feed store. Silence fell on Dry Creek, a heavy, stunned silence, broken only by the sharp, angry crackle of the fire. Caroline did not move. She stayed on top of Finn, her body shaking in great, racking shudders. She could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart against her own. Or maybe it was just her heart. He is alive," she whispered into the dirt. The ranch hand who had fired the shot ran up, joined by two others. They stood, looking down at the scene, at the dead raider, at the woman covering the man. "Ma'am," the hand said, his voice trembling, Is he—" "He is alive," Caroline said, her voice stronger. She pushed herself up. Help me get him inside." They were gentle. They lifted Finn, his head lolling. They carried him to the main house. Jed Carter was there, peeking out from under the heavy dining table. He saw the looks on the men's faces and his own went pale. They laid Finn on a cot. Caroline, in a daze, took charge. She did not ask. She commanded. "Water," she said, "and bandages and whiskey." Her hands, which had been so steady with the rifle, were just as steady cleaning the wound on his head. It was a long, ugly gash, but the bone was not broken. He was alive. He woke an hour later. The sun was fully up. The feed store was a charred, black skeleton. The ranch had held. Finn's eyes flickered open. The world was blurry. He saw a face. Caroline. Her hair was full of dirt, her face smudged with soot. He had never seen anything more beautiful. "You," he whispered. His voice was a dry rasp. "I am here," she said, her own voice thick. He fumbled at his neck. His fingers were clumsy. He was trying to get something. A leather cord. He pulled it over his head, his face tight with pain. In his palm was a small, simple pendant, carved from what looked like white shell. It was a perfect, tiny crescent moon. He did not have the strength to speak. He just pushed it into her hand. He had given her his mother's handkerchief for her blood. Now he was giving her this for his life. He was transferring a power, a piece of his own soul. She closed her hand around it, the smooth, cool shape a contrast to the heat of the morning. "A man gave that to me," he whispered, his eyes closing. "A man I pulled from a fire. He said it was for protection." He was asleep again, the sleep of pure exhaustion. Caroline stood. She slowly, with hands that were now shaking, put the leather cord around her own neck. The small moon slipped inside her shirt, coming to rest against her skin. It was warm. The fire that had attacked them was a fire of human greed. It was loud, and it was violent, but it had not burned away the rot. By noon, the news had hit the town, but the story was twisted. The whispers in the general store were not of a woman's courage. They were of her poison. "Heard that widow up at Dry Creek finally brought her trouble home," one woman said. "That is right. The McVeigh gang never came near, not until she showed up. And poor Mr. LaRue took a beam to the head, they say, trying to protect her. A man like that, brought low by, well, you know." The town, in its blindness, had forgotten her heroism. They remembered only her name and her reputation. The ranch was saved, but Caroline Doss was now, more than ever, on trial. The raid was over, but the war for Dry Creek had just begun. Finn LaRue was alive, but the beam had left its mark for 3 days. He drifted in and out of consciousness on the cot in the main house, his strength sapped by the fever that followed the head wound. Caroline, with a silent, grim authority that no one dared question, tended him. She cleaned the gash. She forced water between his cracked lips. She sat by him, the crescent moon pendant warm against her own skin, a silent, borrowed talisman. The ranch hands, in the wake of the fight, were a changed group. The man who had fired the shot that saved her, a young hand named Toph, now refused to meet her eyes. He did not mock her. Instead, he treated her with a terrified, awkward deference. He would leave a tin of coffee outside her door. He would make sure the water bucket was full. He was, she realized, in awe of what she had done, and it terrified him. The town, however, was not in awe. The whispers that had started in the general store grew into a low, steady roar of public opinion. Jed Carter, who had spent the entire fight under the dining table, was the town's main source of news, and he painted a picture that suited his own cowardice. He told them the widow had provoked the fight, that her presence, her unnatural, unwomanly presence, was a magnet for trouble, that the McVeigh gang had never been so bold, that Red Scarf's injury was a personal insult that would bring ruin down on all of them, and that poor, good-hearted Finn LaRue, in his noble attempt to protect the helpless woman, had been struck down. She had not only trapped him, the story now went, she had practically killed him. She was a curse. On the fourth day, Finn's fever broke. He woke to a clear head, a skull-splitting pain, and an empty room. He was alone. Caroline was in her tack room. She was not packing. Not yet. She was just sitting on her cot, her hands, which had been so steady with a rifle and a bandage, lying limp in her lap. The tide of public opinion had washed up to the ranch. Jed Carter, his courage returned, had delivered the verdict that morning. "The boss will be back in 2 days," he had said, standing a safe distance from her. "The men are uneasy. Miss Doss, the town is concerned. This trouble with McVeigh, it's tied to you. They all say it. You've brought this." She had just looked at him. She had not said a word. The ranch hand, Toph, had been nearby, pretending to fix a saddle. He had heard. He had looked at the ground, his face pale. He did not defend her. He did not say, "She saved us. She shot their leader. She saved Finn." He said nothing. His silence was the final, killing blow. Her heroism had been erased. She was, once again, just a problem, a fat widow who brought disaster. She sat in the tack room, and she felt the old, cold, familiar feeling, the feeling of being too much. She was too much for Thomas. She was too much for the town. And now, she was too much for Dry Creek. Her presence was a danger to the only person who had ever seen her. She would not be his ruin. She would not be the weakness that the McVeigh gang used to destroy this place, and him. A quiet, cold resolve settled over her. She would leave, not in anger, not in defeat, but as a strategic retreat, a sacrifice. She would not write a letter. A letter would be a plea for him to follow. She would just disappear. She would choose silence. That night, the sky opened up again. The deluge of the week before had been a cleansing. This was different. It was a cold, miserable, weeping rain. It was the sky's judgment, confirming the town's. Finn was asleep in the main house. She had checked. He was breathing deeply, the sleep of a man on the mend. She went to her tack room. She packed her satchel, the good boots, which had served her so well, the few items of clothing, Thomas's rifle. She left the small tin of coffee Toph had given her. She slipped out of the barn. The rain hit her instantly, plastering her hair to her face, a cold, stinging baptism. She wore her oilskin slicker, but it was not enough. The water found the gaps, running down her neck. It did not matter. She walked. She did not look back at the barn. She did not look at the main house. She just walked, her head down, into the teeth of the wind and the rain. She reached the main road, the fork. One way led back to the town, to the whispers and the closed doors. The other led west, to the open, empty prairie, to a future she could not imagine, but one that was, at least, hers alone. She stopped at the crossroads, the mud sucking at her boots. She stood for a long moment, the rain a curtain around her, isolating her. "You were just going to walk." The voice was not a question. It was a statement. It was a raw, quiet accusation that cut through the sound of the rain. He was standing there, at the fork in the road, as if he had been waiting for her. Finn. He was not wearing a slicker. He was in his shirt sleeves, his coat thrown over his shoulders. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his head. He was pale in the moonlight, and he was leaning on a thick stick of cedar for support. He should not have been on his feet. He looked like a ghost, a tall, angry specter of the man she had left. "Finn," She breathed. "You should be in bed. Your head—" "My head is fine," he said. His voice was rough. "It is my back that is angry. You were just going to leave. No word." She had no words. The shame was a physical thing, clogging her throat. "I woke up," he said, taking a difficult step toward her. "The room was too quiet. I knew." "You do not understand," she said, her voice a desperate whisper. "The town, Jed, even Toph, they blame me. I am the curse. Finn, I am the one who brought McVeigh. I am the one who got you hurt. I am your weakness." He stopped, just a few feet from her. The rain was running in rivers off his hatless head, but he did not seem to feel it. "You are my weakness," he repeated. His voice was dead flat. "Yes, and I will not. I will not be that. I am leaving, so you can be strong. So this ranch can be strong." He looked at her, and even in the darkness, she could see the fire in his eyes. It was not anger. It was something else, something deeper and more painful. "You think you leaving makes me strong?" He took another step, unsteady. He reached into his coat pocket. "You forgot this." He pressed something into her palm. It was his mother's handkerchief. It was not wet from the rain. It was warm and dry. He must have had it clutched in his hand the whole time. "It is yours," he said. "You bled on it." She looked at the small, square piece of linen in her hand, and the tears she had refused to shed finally came. They mixed with the rain, a hot, salty flood. "I cannot stay," she wept, the words torn from her. "Finn, I do not know how to stay. Everywhere I stay, I bring ruin." He was in front of her now. He was close enough to touch. He looked down at her, his face a map of pain, both new and old. "You do not have to know how," he said, his voice so raw it was barely a whisper. "You do not have to know how to stay." He took a ragged breath. "Just do not go." He did not pull her in. He did not kiss her. He simply raised his hands, his cold, wet hands, and placed them on her shoulders. She, in turn, put her hands on his chest to steady him, to steady herself. And they leaned. They pressed their foreheads together, the wet brims of their hats clicking. The world disappeared. There was no crossroads. There was no town. There was no McVeigh Ridge. There was only the sound of the rain, a steady, hushing sound on the oilskin of their slickers. She put her ear against his chest, right over his heart, through the cold, stiff, wet layers of his coat and her own. She could feel it, a steady, thrumming beat, lump, 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 lump. It was not fast. It was not panicked. It was the sound of a man who was staying, the sound of responsibility, the sound of an unshouted promise. She was the strong one. She was the one who ran, who shielded, who fought. But in that moment, at the crossroads, in the rain, she let herself be kept. She leaned her weight against him, and he did not buckle. The moment stretched, held in the cinematic curtain of the falling rain. Clang, clang, clang! The sound was wrong. It cut through the rain, sharp and frantic. It was the church bell, from the town, ringing at 2 a.m. A new sound joined it, a man's voice, distant but high with terror. "Fire, God Almighty, fire the church is on fire." The church bell was a frantic, metallic scream, cutting through the steady hush of the rain. Clang, clang, clang! It was an alarm, a sound of pure panic. And then the voice, high and thin, carried on the wind, "Fire, God Almighty, fire the church is on fire." Finn and Caroline, frozen at the crossroads, broke apart. The intimate, quiet world of their rain-soaked embrace shattered. They looked at each other, and then they both looked toward the town. Over the low rooftops, a new light was competing with the moon, a terrible, hungry, orange glow. "The horses," Finn said. His voice was no longer that of a lover or a wounded man. It was a soldier's. They did not have horses. They ran. They ran, side by side, their boots slipping in the mud of the road. Finn was still leaning on his stick, but he was moving with a desperate, lunging speed. Caroline was just as fast, her satchel bumping against her back, his mother's handkerchief still clutched in her fist. They reached the town square, and the scene was chaos. The rain had slowed to a miserable, hissing drizzle, not nearly enough to fight the inferno. The town's small, wooden chapel, the one with the white steeple and the brass bell, was a roaring tower of flame. The wind was high, feeding it, sending sparks and burning shingles sailing into the night. The entire town was there, a pathetic, terrified crowd in their nightgowns and shirt sleeves. They had formed a bucket brigade from the main well, a line of useless, desperate gestures against a fire that was eating their only holy place. "Who?" a man yelled. "Who did this?" "McVeigh," another answered, his voice trembling. "It must have been McVeigh. It is a warning." "It is the Lord's judgment," the preacher cried, his arms raised to the sky, his face illuminated by the heat. "Judgment on our sins." A woman at the front of the crowd was screaming. It was a sound of animal grief, a sound that cut through the roar of the flames. She was on her knees in the mud, being held back by two other women. "My son," she shrieked. "Eli, my boy, he ran back inside for his kitten. He ran back." A collective groan of horror rose from the crowd. The stakes, which had been about property and community fear, had just become unbearable. A child. The preacher, his face a mask of tragic acceptance, moved to the hysterical woman. "It is God's will. Sister Davis," he shouted over the roar. "The boy he is lost to us. The Lord has taken him." He was sentencing a 6-year-old boy to death. The crowd froze. The bucket brigade stopped. They were no longer fighters. They were spectators at a funeral. They were paralyzed, watching, accepting the loss. This was their morality. This was their limit. Caroline stood at the edge of the square, her chest heaving, the rain and sweat running into her eyes. She looked at the crowd. She saw them all. She saw the women who had whispered about her in the general store, now weeping into their hands. She saw Jed Carter, his face pale, hiding behind the town water trough, a spectator. She looked at Finn. He was beside her, his face a grim, terrible mask in the firelight. He was leaning heavily on his stick, his jaw clenched so hard the muscles jumped. He was a soldier, and he was watching a child die. He made a sound, a low growl, and he started to move. He dropped the stick. He was going to go in himself, with his head wound, weak. Caroline put her hand on his chest. It was a firm, solid gesture. He stopped, surprised, and looked at her. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was absolute. "Not you, your head." Before he could argue, before he could even form a protest, she was moving. She did not make a speech. She did not yell a battle cry. She did not ask for permission. She simply did the work. She pulled her hat down low, cinching the strap under her chin. She buttoned her oilskin slicker, the one that was already soaked, all the way to her throat. She looked at the roaring, open doorway of the church, a portal into hell, and she ran. She ran straight at the burning building. The crowd let out a single, collective gasp. "The widow!" someone shrieked. "Where is she going? She is mad!" She did not slow. She hit the porch, the planks hot enough to burn through her boots, and she disappeared into the smoke and the flames. The heat was a physical blow. It was a solid wall that stole her breath. The smoke was thick, black, and choked with the smell of burning pine and melting varnish. She could not see. She could not breathe. She dropped to her knees, below the worst of the smoke, and crawled. "Eli!" she screamed, her voice a dry rasp. "Eli!" The church was an orchestra of destruction. The roar of the fire, the crack of splitting timbers, the high-pitched whistle of the wind through the broken windows. She heard it, a small sound, A cry. Here! She crawled toward the sound, her hands sinking into hot embers. The pain was immediate, searing, but she did not stop. She pushed aside a smoldering piece of roofing. He was there, under a pew, against the wall. A small boy, perhaps 6 years old, his face streaked with tears and soot, and clutched in his arms was a tiny, singed black kitten. He was paralyzed with terror. "Come," Caroline said. Her voice was not a mother's. It was a command. "We are going." She did not have time to be gentle. She grabbed the boy. She tore open her slicker, the one that was already starting to smolder, and she stuffed him inside, kitten and all. "Hold your breath," she yelled, and she pulled the oilskins shut, cocooning him against her body. The roof groaned above them, a long, tearing sound. A beam, thick as a man's body and wreathed in flame, crashed down onto the aisle, right where she had been. It blocked the door. The way out was gone. She looked around, her eyes burning. The vestry. There was a small door to the side. She stood. She did not know she had stood. She was a force of pure will. She grabbed the boy, holding him like a shield, and she ran at the vestry door. It was locked. She did not hesitate. She turned her back to it. She was a large, strong woman. She used her weight. She kicked backward, her heel striking the wood just above the handle. The old wood splintered. The lock gave. She fell through, backward, into the small, smoke-filled room. She did not stop. She kicked open the outer door to the vestry, the one that led to the graveyard. The crowd in the square had been waiting for an eternity. The seconds had stretched into an age. They were silent, their faces turned, staring at the inferno. The preacher was praying aloud. Sister Davis was a silent, collapsed heap on the ground. The vestry door, on the side of the church, burst open. A shape emerged. It was not a woman. It was a monster, a thing from the fire, silhouetted against the orange glare. It was smoking. It was staggering. Then they saw her. Caroline Doss. Her hat was gone. Her hair was a singed, smoking ruin. Her slicker was not a coat. It was a blackened, melted rag, still smoldering. Her face was black with soot. Her hands, which she held away from her body, were bright, angry red. The skin was gone. But she was walking, and clutched to her chest. She was carrying their child. The smoke rose from her back, from the remains of her coat, in two great, dark, tattered streams, like wings of ash. She walked 10 steps from the burning church, into the center of the town square, and she stopped. She swayed, her breath coming in great, tearing gasps. The town was dead silent. Not a cough, not a whisper, not a single prayer. They were stunned, as if they had just witnessed a miracle, and it had been performed by the wrong person. Caroline fumbled with the slicker. She opened it. The boy, Eli, was untouched. He was crying, his face dirty, but he was alive. He was still clutching the kitten. She let the boy slide to the ground. He ran, screaming, to his mother, who grabbed him in an embrace that was more animal than human. Caroline stood there, alone, in the center of the square. She had done the work. She had done what they had all said was impossible. She was burned. She was broken. And she had nothing left. She looked at the crowd, and she waited for their judgment. Finn pushed through the silent crowd. He was no longer leaning on his stick. He was walking straight, his limp barely noticeable. He did not go to her. He did not go to comfort her or to tend her. He stopped in the middle of the square, between Caroline and the entire town. He turned his back to her, a deliberate act, and he faced them. He faced the preacher. He faced Jed Carter. He faced the women who had whispered. And then, slowly, with a terrible, solemn grace, he went down. He dropped to one knee, in the mud and the ash of the town square, a soldier, a warrior, kneeling. He did not look at the town. He was done with them. He turned his head, a pained, difficult motion, and he looked up at the woman standing behind him, the woman who was burned and soot-streaked and beautiful. His voice was not loud. It was a rasp, but in the absolute, reverent silence of the square, every person heard every word. "You said," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion she could not name. "You said you were too much." He shook his head, a slow, painful denial. "You are not too much." He looked her up and down, from her ruined hair to her burned hands, and his gaze was not one of pity. It was one of awe. "You are just enough." He took a breath, and his voice firmed. "A public declaration. For me." The words hung in the air. It was a choice, a public claiming, in front of all of them, in the ashes of their church. He had drawn his line. The silence that followed was different. It was not shock. It was thought. It was the sound of 100 minds, a whole community, recalibrating their world. A new figure moved. From the edges of the crowd, an old woman, Martha Hale, the town's other widow, a woman defined by her loss for 20 years. She was frail, and she walked with a stick. She walked past Finn. She walked right up to Caroline. She looked at Caroline's face, at the soot and the pain, and she looked at her hands, her raw, red, useless hands. "I was a widow," Martha Hale said, her voice a thin, reedy sound, but it carried in the silence. "I was a widow for half my life. I wore black. I kept my eyes down. I lived on what they gave me." The old woman reached out a frail, liver-spotted hand. She did not touch the burns. She gently, so gently, touched the blackened, smoking sleeve of Caroline's slicker. "But she said, her voice full of a sudden, terrible clarity, a lifetime of regret and a moment of revelation. "I never dared to live like you." Martha Hale turned, her back to Caroline, and she faced the town. Her town. "She is not the curse," the old woman said, her voice rising, finding a strength it had not had in decades. "She is the one who walked through the fire, while we just watched." That was it, the soft justice, the public recognition, the whispers, the judgments, the rumor, the moral certainty of the town. It was all burned away, reduced to ash. Along with the church, this fire had been a baptism. And Caroline, their outcast, their problem, had been the only one brave enough to walk through it. The McVeigh Ridge gang was forgotten. Their raid, their bullets, their man-made fire seemed small and petty compared to this. They were ashes in the wind. The spell was broken. The child, Eli, who had been clinging to his mother, ran from her. He ran across the square. He ran to the smoking, burned woman. He wrapped his small arms around Caroline's legs, burying his face in her blackened skirt, clutching her with all his might. And Caroline, with her ruined hands held out, unable to touch, unable to comfort, just stood there, and, for the first time in her life, she let someone hold on. The fire in the town square had consumed more than the church. It had burned away the town's hard, moral certainty. It had burned away Caroline's reputation as a curse, and it had burned the skin from her hands. In the days that followed, she sat in the main house at Dry Creek, her hands wrapped in white bandages. Useless. It was Martha Hale who tended her, the old widow, her own hands frail and spotted, gently applying a salve of comfrey and lard. "You will heal," Martha said. It was not a question. "But they will scar. Be grateful for them. They are a map of where you walked." The town, in its own awkward, silent way, tried to atone. They did not speak of it. They did not offer apologies. They offered things. A jar of preserved peaches appeared on the porch. A new oilskin slicker, better than the one she had lost, was left by the barn. Tough, the ranch hand, left a perfectly braided short leather quirt by her door, and then ran before she could see him. Finn was quiet. His head had healed. leaving a thin, white line in his dark hair. He did the work of two men, his and hers, his silence a heavy, protective blanket over the ranch. When she could finally use her hands again, though they were stiff and strange, she found him by the corral. She had her satchel packed. "I am ready to work," she said. He just looked at her. "The work is hard." "I know. I am not staying at Dry Creek," he said, not looking at her. He was looking east, toward the land that had once been her husband's, the land Thomas had bought and never had the strength to break, the old, overgrown Doss homestead. "The boss is back. He is grateful. He is giving me my back pay." "So you are leaving?" she said, her heart a cold stone. "We are leaving," he said. He did not propose. There was no ring. He did not get on one knee. He just made a statement. He was going to build a home, and he assumed she would be the one to make it one. "There is no homestead," she said. "It is just a patch of weeds and a burned-out chimney." "Then we will build one," Finn said. They did not have a wedding. There was no preacher, no white dress, no bells. Their vows were the sound of a hammer on a nail, the scrape of a saw through new lumber, the thud of an axe splitting cedar for posts. They started with the old chimney. The only thing left, they built around it, a new house, solid and square, made from new wood and salvaged stone. Finn hammered, and Caroline, her scarred hands learning to grip the wood, lifted. On the third day of building, Toph and two other hands from Dry Creek rode over. They did not say anything. They just dismounted, took hammers from their saddlebags, and started working on the roof. The house grew. And then the people came. The first was Eli, the boy from the fire. His mother, her nerves shattered, brought him. He does not sleep," she whispered to Caroline. "He just watches, but he watches for you. Can he just help? He is in the way at home." Eli, small and silent, stood behind his mother, clutching his kitten, who was now named Cinder. Caroline looked at the boy. She looked at Finn. Finn just nodded. "We need someone to carry the nails," he said. Eli stayed. He was the first. The next were two brothers, 9 and 10 years old, who had been orphaned when their father, a drover, was lost in a stampede. They had nowhere to go. They showed up at the new homestead, hungry and fierce, with the same reading the weather look in their eyes that Finn had. "A man has to earn his keep," Finn told them, his voice gentle. He handed them a bucket. "The horses need water." Then came a boy with a lame leg, cast off from a larger ranch, who could not ride but had the most clever, quick hands Caroline had ever seen. The house they were building became a home. It was not a verb, it was a sanctuary. Finn was their center. They did not call him Father. They called him Mr. Finn, or sometimes, when they were feeling brave, Boss. He was their teacher. He did not raise his voice. His discipline was in his patience. He taught the two brothers how to read a brand, how to shoe a horse, how to make the land provide. He sat with the lame boy, whose name was Silas, and he taught him his knots. He showed him the war knot, the one that holds, and the boy's fingers, quick and sure, learned it in an hour. He taught Eli to whistle, not a loud, sharp whistle, but a low, two-note call that he used for the horses, a sound of peace. Caroline was their anchor. Her hands, when they had fully healed, were a map of the fire. The new skin was pink and tight, a permanent reminder, but they were strong. She unpacked Thomas's books, the ones she had carried as a burden. Now, they were a treasure. In the evenings, by the light of the new hearth, she taught them. Eli, the two brothers, even Silas. She taught them their letters. She taught them to read and to write their own names. Each word, each letter she drew on the slate felt like a stitch. It was as if she were sewing up the torn, ragged edges of all their pasts, creating a new, strong, whole cloth. The town which had been watching began to change. The reform was as quiet as a shift in the wind. When she went to the general store, now with Eli holding her scarred hand, the whispers were gone. The women nodded. They did not look at her body. They looked at her hands. "Good day," the storekeeper said, his eyes respectful. "What can I get for you, Miss Carroll?" The name was new. The widow was gone. She had been burned away in the church. Miss Carroll had walked out. In the evenings, Finn would sit on the new porch, watching the children check the chickens, their voices a low, happy murmur. He was always whittling. He had a piece of soft cedar, and his knife was slowly, carefully, pulling a shape from it. It was a horse, a small, simple, wooden horse. Its legs were bent. Its head was thrown back. It was not standing still. It was in a full, joyous run. It was hope, in motion, in. News came, as it always did, on the slow, meandering paths of travelers. A U.S. marshal, stopping at the homestead for water, confirmed the rumor. The McVeigh Ridge gang was no more. "Broke up," the marshal said, wiping his mustache. "After that red scarf fella got his arm shot up, and then they made the mistake of burning that church. Well, even outlaws got a line. They turned on him. He is in the wind, hiding, most like. A broken man." It was not justice in a courtroom. It was not a hanging. It was just an ending. The power they had held, the fear they had wielded, had dissolved like salt in water. The world had moved on and left them behind. The winter was hard, but the new house was warm. The spring came, and with it, a miracle. The land around the homestead, the land that Thomas had never broken, the land that had been bare and full of weeds, exploded. A sea of purple blue. The bluebonnets had come, thick and defiant. A carpet of resurrection. They ran all the way up to the porch, a blessing from the earth itself. Nature had looked at their small, chosen family, and it had confirmed their right to be there. It had declared them, finally, home. The summer was long, and it was good. On the porch of the new homestead, a long table was built. It was not for a wedding feast. It was for a Sunday dinner that just happened. There was no preacher. There was no white dress. There was just a large pot of beans, a side of smoked venison, and the sound of children laughing. Martha Hale sat at one end. Her face, which had been a mask of grief for 20 years, now softened in the afternoon sun. Toph, the ranch hand, sat at the other, awkward and quiet, but he was there. In the middle were the children Eli, who was no longer silent, telling a long, complicated story about his kitten. Cinder, the two orphan brothers, who were arguing over the last piece of cornbread, and Silas, his lame leg propped up on a stool, quietly, expertly braiding a new rope for Toph's saddle. Caroline moved among them. She was not the same woman who had walked into Dry Creek. Her hair, which had been singed, was growing back, thick and dark. Her face was open. Her hands were a map of her journey. They were scarred from the fire, the new skin pink and tight over the knuckles. She did not hide them. She used them. They were the hands that had built this house, that had taught these children, that were now serving the food. Around her neck, outside her simple cotton shirt, rested the crescent moon pendant. Finn had restrung it on a stronger leather cord. It was a sign, a mark. She had walked through the fire, and she was beautiful in her own way, a way that had nothing to do with society's approval and everything to do with her own strength. The town, in its slow, quiet way, had given its blessing. The recognition, which had started as a whisper from Martha Hale, had become a series of actions. When they rebuilt the church, a smaller, simpler building on the same spot, the extra lumber, the good, seasoned pine, had been delivered to the Doss homestead. A contribution, the men said, looking at the ground. For the children's home. The women came, too. They brought sacks of seed corn, bean seeds, and potato eyes. It was not charity. It was an investment. It was the community, finally, recognizing itself in her. The last fading rumor of the McVeigh Ridge gang had come and gone. As insignificant as a puff of dust, the U.S. Marshal had been right. Red Scarf, a man broken by a single, well-placed shot, and the burning of a church he had nothing to do with, had lost his power. The gang, superstitious and spooked, had scattered. Red Scarf himself, they said, had been seen in a saloon up in the territory. A one-armed man drinking himself into an early grave. The threat was gone. Not with a bang, but with a sad, pathetic whimper. That evening, after the small celebration, the children were asleep. The dishes were done. The homestead was quiet, wrapped in the cool night air. Caroline sat on the porch step, just looking at the fields of bluebonnets, now silver in the moonlight. She had done something earlier, in the quiet of the afternoon. She had taken one of Thomas's books, a volume of poetry he had loved. She had taken a piece of paper and a pen. She wrote, her scarred fingers carefully forming the letters. It was not a long letter. It was not to Finn. It was to Thomas. She wrote, I worked and I was seen. She did not weep. She just was. She folded the small piece of paper. She did not send it. She did not burn it. She tucked it into the pages of his book, and she put the book back on the shelf. The past was not erased. It was just put in its proper place. Finn came and sat next to her on the step. He was quiet for a long time, just breathing the same air she breathed. He was holding something in his hand. He opened his palm. In it was the small, wooden horse. It was finished. He had sanded it with such care that it felt like polished stone. It was a perfect, tiny thing. Its legs bent, its head high, caught in a moment of pure, joyful running. She took it from him. It fit perfectly in her own scarred palm. It is beautiful, she whispered. I finished it, he said, stating the obvious. She looked at him, at his face, which was no longer a mask of weather and war, but just a man. You once said, she started, trying to find the words. You saw strength. He looked away, not at her, but at the dark field, at the world they had built. I am not a man for words. Caroline? He paused. He was looking at the way she held the small horse, at the fire-marked skin. Where others saw a widow, he said, his voice a low, rough truth. I saw a wildfire. He had seen her, the part of her that was not a wife, not a victim, not a burden, the part that was a force of nature, the part that could destroy, and the part that could cleanse, and the part that could clear the ground for new, stubborn life to grow. She did not say anything. She just leaned her head, just for a moment, against his shoulder. He did not move. He just stayed. The spring came again. The bluebonnets returned, a more violent, more beautiful purple blue than the year before. They flooded the fields. The children, Eli and the brothers and Silas, ran barefoot through them, their shouts carrying on the clean, warm air. They were no longer orphans or rejects or burdens. They were just children. Caroline stood on the porch, her hands resting on the rail. Finn came and stood beside her. He did not take her hand. He did not have to. They just stood, watching their world. The sun was high, their two shadows, long and clear, stretched out before them, over the porch, over the yard, and into the sea of blue. They were not touching. They were parallel. They were separate. And they were whole. And they were pointed in the same direction. They never needed bells. The fields rang blue. Thank you for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. It is always good to connect, and if you enjoyed this tale, please subscribe to our channel, Wild West Tales, and give this video a like. It also helps us a great deal if you press the hype button. It lets more folks hear these stories.